Hello YouTube and welcome back to another alternate history video. And today I got the 2000 presidential election. This time I got it between Democrat John Kerry, who was the 2004 nominee and was a senator from Massachusetts, but I got the Republican nominee as Dick Cheney from Wyoming, who was the running mate of George Bush, and I believe he was Secretary of Defense at one point. And like I said, he was Bush's running mate. And in this scenario, I do got him as a nominee. If maybe Bush didn't run and Cheney decided to run and end up getting the nomination, and Kerry runs and he gets it. So I think this would be an interesting one. It could probably be pretty similar to the actual scenario, but I could see this really going either way because I don't know if Dick Cheney would be that enthusiastic as a candidate, wouldn't have charisma, in my opinion. But of course, Kerry had his flaws too. But he was pretty good for like the Rust Belt and traditional Democratic areas where they did good back then. But like I said, I could definitely see this one going either way. So let's get into it. So I believe Kerry is definitely going to win California solidly. Oregon and Washington were competitive in the actual scenario because Bush did pretty well around the suburbs, but Gore was able to win Oregon very narrowly because of like Portland, and then he won Washington, I believe, by at least 5 points or so. So I think Kerry would do the same. Probably win Washington pretty likely. I don't really see Dick making it that competitive like George Bush did. Oregon would probably be about a lean. Cheney would, however, win Idaho, his home state of Wyoming and Montana, as well as Utah. Uh, Arizona would be pretty likely. I think it was at least like a 6 point margin for Bush. He would win the Dakotas still. All of Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas would be pretty solid. Uh, I believe Cheney would still win the South like Bush did, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, because of running like on physical and social conservatism. I don't really know. Although I think Dick Cheney was actually more of a social moderate compared to Bush at the time. So maybe the South could be a little closer, but I don't really see Kerry making it that competitive because, of course, he'd be socially liberal and physical at that too. So I think Cheney would still hold on to his state solidly. I don't know if they'd be a strong margin as Bush did, but I think they'd still be solid enough to be pretty safe, as well as South Carolina, Kentucky, Indiana, because of very rural parts in the state. Tennessee was at least a 3 point margin that Bush won about because it was Al Gore's home state, but since it's John Kerry, I think Tennessee would be pretty solid enough to be safe because it was for Bush in 04 when he won against Kerry, so I think it would be for Cheney. Uh, Illinois, I think we go Kerry pretty solidly. Bush was kind of competitive, like around the suburbs. I think it was like an 11 or 12 point margin that Gore won about, but it's still right on the safe margin. So I think I would say away with Kerry because of Cook County, where Chicago is. Georgia, I think it would be pretty solid for Cheney. I think it was just on the safe margin for Bush. I think it would be pretty likely for Cheney, though. I actually just put it safe because I think it was about like that for Bush. I think it was like 11 points or so, but he won it by a bigger margin 4 years later. I think at least by 16 points. But I'll put that in the Cheney column. I think Cheney would take Virginia pretty likely, as Bush did win by that margin both times because of the suburbs and doing well in rural areas. West Virginia, I think, would be pretty likely because, of course, Gore ran on environmentalism and more regulation on the environment. Also, I think when Clinton was president, he put more regulation on the environment. And, of course, a coal-rich state like West Virginia didn't like Gore's environmental regulations that he proposed. So the state definitely shifted to Republican and went for Bush. So I think we'll go for Cheney in this scenario because Kerry is kind of similar to Gore on his environmental positions. So I think West Virginia would be pretty likely for Cheney. Some more Kerry states up here I think would be New York, solid, Vermont, all of Maine, his home state of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. Uh, Hawaii as well. And Dick Cheney would take Alaska. Minnesota, I think would go for Kerry. I think it was like a 2 point margin for Gore. So I see that being pretty lean for Kerry there, probably about 4 or 5 points. Wisconsin, Michigan, Kerry did win in 2004, but Wisconsin especially was close that year, and it was also close in 2000 as well. But I think because of Kerry and Gore's performances like in the Driftless area and Madison, Milwaukee, places like that, I think Kerry would win it in a tilt margin still. Michigan was more of a margin for Gore. I think it was at least 5 points because of his performance like in Detroit and the suburbs. And Kerry did pretty well in like the Upper Peninsula, I think in 04. So I think Kerry would win in this scenario against Cheney because I don't really see Cheney having that working class appeal. And of course, like I said earlier, I don't think if he is enthusiastic as a candidate like Bush would have been. So I think that would be a lean for Kerry. Now, Colorado was a likely margin for Bush because of his performance like in the suburbs and rural areas around Denver, the suburbs there. And so I think it would stay away for Dick Cheney. New Mexico, however, was won by Gore, but it was very narrowly. So I think Kerry would do the same because of the suburbs there and the Hispanic vote. But I think it would still be a close one. So I give that to Kerry. And Nevada here, I think was at least a lean margin because of Washoe County and Gore won Clark County. So I think I would stick with Cheney because Kerry did lose it to Bush in 04. But like I said, maybe get a little closer. But I think Cheney would be on because of rural areas in Washoe County. Nevada being more of a Republican state back then. But it was considered more of a swing state at this point. But I think they would stick with Cheney. Missouri, I think it would be pretty likely for Cheney to lean because I don't really see Kerry having the appeal there because of the rural areas. So I think that'd be pretty solid for Dick Cheney. Pennsylvania, I think would go for Kerry in a lean margin. He did win in 04 because of working class support there, Erie County, and I think he did pretty well in the western part where Democrats did good back then. And he did, and also the Philadelphia suburbs, places like that. I think we had enough for Kerry to win on a lean margin. Ohio did go for Bush, because of doing good in rural areas and pretty good around certain suburbs. And of course, Gore did good in the northeastern part. That was a Democratic stronghold for many years, working class areas there. But I think since Bush was able to win it, I think it would stay with Cheney. And plus, Kerry didn't win in 04 either. So I think Cheney would hang on to that. Iowa, however, did go for Gore because he was pretty moderate enough to win it. It was very tight, though. And Kerry lost in 04, so I could definitely see this one going either way. But since Kerry was more to the left of Gore, I could actually see Cheney maybe winning this, but I think it would be in a tilt margin. But like I said, I could definitely see that going either way. But I think since Kerry is definitely more to the left on Gore on certain issues, I think it'd be enough for Cheney to win it. North Carolina here, I think it's going to be pretty solid for Cheney and a likely margin because of Appalachia and Bush did pretty well in the research triangle, I believe. So I think that wouldn't change much and go for Cheney. And now there's 2 states left, New Hampshire and Florida. New Hampshire was won by Kerry in 04. He was from Massachusetts, so he definitely had his New England appeal. I believe it went to him by a couple points or so. It actually went for Bush, however, in the actual 2000 scenario, but very narrowly, because Bush did run on more of a anti-war platform, like against nation building, so that went pretty well in New Hampshire, and Bush having his fiscally conservative appeal and moderate stances on certain social issues, and like I say, ran on an anti-war platform against nation building, so that definitely helped him in a state like New Hampshire that tends to have more of a libertarian identity to it. However, with this being Kerry, I could definitely see him actually winning it because, like I say, he did win in '04, and he's from Massachusetts, but I think it would still be a tilt margin with Kerry winning it. And the last state is Florida, won by Bush in a very controversial outcome. Of course, it was separated by only 500 votes, 537, I think, to be exact. And there was a lot of recounts, and of course, went to the Supreme Court, ruled in favor of Bush, and he was able to get the victory in the state, but definitely a controversial one. However, in 2004, Bush actually won it by, I believe, a 5 point margin over Kerry because he had the incumbency advantage then. And Kerry didn't really have the best bill like in the Panhandle, and Bush did pretty well in Central Florida, and he also did well with Hispanics that year. But I think for that reason, Cheney would take this, but I think it would be a tilt, probably by a couple points or so. Maybe a little more than Bush won it by in the actual scenario. But I think since Kerry wasn't able to win in '04, I think Cheney could pull it off. And so there's the final map with Cheney winning a narrow one, still 274 to Kerry's 263. Thanks for watching this. Comment below on what you think of this and whether you agree or not. I thank you for watching, subscribing, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you next time.